What's going on, guys? Jerry Neutron here. This time I'm back with some PC hardware, and today we're going to take a look at a budget case from Bitfenix. They've just released this new case called the Nova, and it's looking to be the bang for the buck king with a price of around 45 bucks. So let's take a look at it and see if it'll be the next go-to budget case. Starting at the front, you've got two USB ports up top, one of them USB 3.0, which is always welcome in a budget case, as well as power and reset buttons and your mic and headphone jacks. And just below that, you've got a 5¼ inch bay. I'll probably throw a Blu-ray burner in there because streaming is for casuals. And if you follow along the edges of the front cover, you'll find these mesh strips leading all the way down towards the aluminum badge at the bottom. And this is where the case gets its airflow. It's not head-on in order to help with noise and just prevent a little bit of dust buildup. Underneath the front cover, the Nova supports two 120mm fans. I actually attempted to install two different brands of fans up front, and both of them were too thick to fit, which I thought was kind of strange because Bitfenix says it'll support standard size fans. So yeah, I'd probably just go with slim 120mm fans up front if you're going to install any. Just to be on the safe side. One other thing I would like to see up front is a dust filter. Even if it's one of those cheap magnetic ones, they're pretty much a must-have in any case. Even with the intake not being directly in front, still gotta have them. Moving on to the left side of the case, you can see the side panel with the optional window. You actually have the choice of buying this case with the window or windowless version. So maybe if you were a business, you could opt for the windowless side panel for your workstations, or if you're just a young guy on a small budget, you can pick up the windowed version for your budget build. The side panels are pretty thin and the window is prone to scratching, so you have to be very careful with how you handle this thing. I'm not going to knock them for it because it is a budget case, but it's just something that you need to be aware of. Moving on again, let's take a look at the back before we open it up. You've got a 120mm mounting point up top. A fan is included there with the case. There are 7 PCI slots on the back and a bottom mounted power supply. But let's finally open this thing up and take a look at the internal layout. So first off, this case supports ATX motherboards, but you can install a micro ATX or even a mini ITX board in here if you're a weirdo. There's a nice large motherboard cutout for installing your CPU cooler, although I find it much easier to just take the motherboard out. That's up to you. You get a few holes for routing cables, which is a major plus in any budget case. No actual grommets, but that's okay because, you know, budget case. So as I mentioned previously, this case comes with a 120mm exhaust fan. This happens to also be the only location where you can install a radiator since the top of the case is completely closed off and there's not enough room up front. Clearance wise, you can run a power supply up to 220mm long, a graphics card up to 320mm long, and a CPU cooler up to 160mm tall. So pretty much anything up to a Hyper 212 Evo in height and shorter should work here. For storage, you get this nice little drive cage which can hold 4 3.5-inch drives, and just above that is room for 2 2.5-inch drives. So for such a small case, you get plenty of storage options, which is nice to see. If we look behind the motherboard tray, you can see there is basically no room for cable routing other than by the holes up front. Not sure what the thought process was here. I'm not going to stuff all my cables up front, so I'd like to have a lot more room behind the motherboard tray. But anyway, let's throw a build in here and see how everything comes together. Alright, so here's a final build. I'm running a micro ATX motherboard, a Hyper 212 Evo, which barely fits. It's practically touching the windowed side panel, and an R9 290. I also threw in a couple of 3.5-inch drives and an SSD, and since I'm not running any fans up front, I turned the drives around to hide the SATA cables just to clean it up a little bit. And everything came together pretty well, minus that one orange SATA cable because I couldn't find a black one laying around. As for cable routing, I also noticed there's no hole for routing the CPU power cable, so I ran it behind the motherboard and through the CPU cutout. Luckily, my power supply has flat cables, so I didn't run into too much of an issue when it came to cable management, but I imagine this would be a pretty big pain with rounded ones. Overall, this is a pretty good attempt at a budget case from Bitfenix, and certainly better than the last budget case I owned. But personally, I wouldn't mind paying a few extra bucks for a case that was just a little bit bigger all around, with a dust filter up front and routing for a CPU power cable. However, if you're on an absolute budget and you just can't spend any more for whatever reason, this case should definitely be on your list of considerations. But that's pretty much it, guys. Leave a comment down below with the name of the case you are currently running if you watched all the way up until this point. You know what to do if you like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, see ya. It's a 5.2-inch screen, 1920 by 1080 resolution, 423 pixels per inch, which is not bad, right? I mean,